I want to make one final announcement for the Center for Inquiry DC. I want to invite you all to a very special event tomorrow at Busboys and Poets on 14th and V Street at 5 p.m. We're having Jeff Charlotte, our panelist here, speaking about his new book, Sweet Heaven When I Die. And as you can see as you can see on his bio, he's the author of 2 best-selling books, C Street and The Family. It's going to be a fantastic event, so I hope you all can be there. Thanks.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's panel. The panel this afternoon will be organizing their talks loosely around the topic. I say loosely because you can tell from the morning panel that we varied a bit from the stated topic, but that's fine. Anyway, the topic for this afternoon's panel is what are some of the most pervasive political and religious conspiracy theories, and how can we distinguish from genuine plots and collusion? I'm going to introduce all panelists at the same time. Our first speaker is going to be Chris Mooney, who's going to be talking about the science of why we deny science and reality. Chris, as many of you know, is the host of CFI's Point of Inquiry podcast. And I could probably stop right there because that's his most significant accomplishment, I think. Right. Now, he is, of course, also a best-selling author and science journalist. He wrote The Republican War on Science, Storm World, and Unscientific America. He's taught. Actually, I'm trying to think. You were at Cambridge University, but I'm not sure you taught there. You were there as a fellow, and he's appeared on just about every show you can think of: the Colbert Report, the Daily Show, MSNBC's Morning Joe, C-SPAN's Book TV, et cetera, et cetera. He's written widely in a number of journals, and it's our great pleasure to have him here. After Chris speaks, we're going to have Jeff Charlotte, who, as Melody just mentioned, is himself also a best-selling author. He wrote The Family and C Street, and his latest book, Sweet Heaven When I Die, just came out. In addition to being a best-selling author, he is someone who has taught at New York University, and he's presently Mellon Assistant Professor of English at Dartmouth. And finally, we're going to have Chip Burleigh. Chip is going to be speaking about Christian dominionism and conspiracy theories. He's an investigative researcher and reporter, photographer, and progressive activist who specializes in the study of right-wing movements in the United States. He's written scholarly articles on conspiracy theories, religious apocalyptic aggression, and organized racist groups. For 30 years, he was the senior analyst at Political Research Associates. He's the co-author of Right-Wing Populism in America, Too Close for Comfort. That sounds like it's too close for comfort. But I guess we'll learn how to deal with it. In any event, I'll give you our first speaker, Chris Mooney.
Thanks, Ron. It's great to be here with everybody. The panel is on conspiracy theories. My talk is not directly, although I'll bring some up, but I think it is good that I go first because I'm going to talk about how this stuff works in the brain, and when it comes to denying reality or having a conspiracy about it, it's really often pretty much the same process, whether it's attacking global warming or whether it's believing that 9/11 was an inside job. So, and I'm going to explain the mechanics of how all that works and why there's so much of it right now. And the starting off point is that I did an article in Mother Jones magazine. It's the first slice for a book that I'm still working on, coming out in April, and it was called The Science of Why We Deny Science, and somehow people really wanted to hear this. They really wanted to understand what's going on here, and the article went viral, and it was, 5,000 tweets and 33,000 Facebook likes and all the rest. So that's what I'm going to mostly share with you. I'm going to start out by setting it in the context of the work that I've done, because I've learned a lot since my 2000 book, The Republican War on Science, which ostensibly might sound like it's on a similar topic, but there's actually a big difference. And the way I think about the problem of people denying science, people denying reality, people spinning out crazy conspiracy theories and beliefs has changed a lot in the 7 years since the Republican War on Science came out. It's not that I believe the book was wrong. I believe, though, that it was incomplete, and I'm trying to achieve some completeness here. So just a reminder, it came out in 2005, and as I disclosed to audiences at the beginning, there was no conscious intention to echo the cover image of another popular book that was also out, it was also popular at the time. And the argument I was making was that, hey, under the last administration, the Bush administration, science was under attack. It was under attack on stem cells, it was under attack on global warming, it was under attack on anything having anything to do with sex, okay? And the government itself was suppressing information. I think that the ethos of the era now past is well captured in a quotation from the former president. He was giving a press conference following the 2004 devastating tsunami that ravaged so many countries in the Pacific Rim. And Bush was asked a question that was basically a scientific one that he definitely wasn't ready for. A journalist said, "Mr. President, does the United States have a warning system in place for the purpose of detecting tsunamis that might threaten us?" And Bush has absolutely no idea, okay? But he hems and haws, and he starts to give a scientific-sounding answer. He starts to say, well, I think we might be less vulnerable than other parts of the world. But then he quickly adds, I'm not a geologist, as you know. And so that was the Bush era. It's over, but by making quips at the expense of the president and refuting some of the misinformation that the administration put out, certainly my book became popular, and I was called upon to go around and talk about it, the first time I'd ever done such a thing. And so I had a strategy of communicating what I'd found. My strategy was to prove people are wrong. When they make claims about science, about global warming, say, about evolution, I would say they say this, and it's wrong because of this, this, and this. You guys are probably familiar with this approach. And I would do it again and again. And that way of communicating about the problem had a very, now I think, predictable effect on audiences of people like you. People who care about science, reason, rationality. It made you angry. It made you ticked off. You were on my side, and you thought, how could these idiots keep saying these crazy things? And then at the end of my talk, all of your hands would go up, and you would say, all right, you made me ticked off. You made me want to punch a wall. I can't believe my government is doing this. You haven't given me any release. You haven't told me what I can do about the problem. And I realized that my instinctual answer to that question, which was, you can go buy my book, was not sufficient, right? You wanted more than that. And so did I. And so since then, in a way, I've been looking for answers, solutions to this broad problem of a disconnect between science, politics, society, and reality. And that's led to lots of efforts. I train scientists to communicate, to try to help them get across what they know better so that there's less denial. But as time passed, I couldn't fail to notice that the problem of denying science, denying reality out there in America, it was not getting better. It's not getting better, right? It's pretty clearly getting worse. If there's one thing I specialize in, it's global warming denial. And that has gotten more monolithic on the political right in the United States as the science has gotten more certain, okay? So the reality and the right have moved in completely divergent directions on global warming in the last 5 years. How is something like that possible? How could that conceivably happen? That's what's begun to consume me. Why do people deny science? Why, when confronted with the facts, why don't they let go? Why do they spin out conspiracies? And, most controversially, why does this seem to happen so frequently today on the political right? We are impaired in thinking about this problem, all of us, because we like the Enlightenment. Okay? You know we do, right? These are our heroes, and for good reason. It's an old and very powerful worldview that animates us. The vision that if you put good information out there, if you use rational arguments, people will come to accept what's true, especially if you give them good education and you teach them critical thinking skills and so on. This, in a way that I didn't even realize, was a major blinder for me. It's dismaying, but unfortunately true, that the Enlightenment view, despite its many virtues, does not describe accurately how people, at least many people, actually make up their minds and how they process information. This began to dawn on me a couple of years after the Republican War on Science came out, and I even know what it was that first made me wake up to this. This is a figure from a 2008 Pew study about the partisan divide over global warming in the United States. I don't know how well you can see it, but I'm going to tell you what you got here. You got three variables, basically. You got political party affiliation, you got belief that global warming is caused by human beings, and you've got level of education, not college grads and college grads. And the reason that this is important is that what it shows is if you're a Republican, then the higher your level of education, the less likely you are to accept scientific reality. Okay? So acceptance of global warming science decreases by about 10% with the higher educated Republicans. But for Democrats and independents, it increases by more. Okay? What's going on there? Aren't we supposed to get smarter? We're supposed to be less in denial? No, it doesn't seem to work that way. Another issue, I call this image Dumb and Dumber. Vaccine deniers, right? They're the same kind of thing. We know who they are. People who think that vaccines cause autism and who actually try to prevent their children from being vaccinated based upon this misinformation, they are not stupid. They tend to be white, wealthy, college-educated, and to research the topic on the internet. They use what Jenny McCarthy called the University of Google. Their brains, their intelligence is the problem. Okay? So knowing more is not a safe recipe for getting people to accept what's true. Okay? It gets even worse. I'm going to tell you about a study by an old friend of mine who's now a political scientist at Dartmouth named Brendan Nyhan. He wanted to look at what happens if you correct falsehoods in a newspaper article. You know, people run corrections. Now we have all these fact-checking organizations, and they're constantly setting the record straight, setting the record straight. Someone says something stupid, pants on fire. Okay? Does this actually work? Does this change any minds? Well, he set up fake newspaper articles in which there were real false claims stated by real people with real words. So it was George W. Bush saying that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction or insinuating it. George W. Bush saying that tax cuts increase government revenue. Okay? And then a Democrat, I forget which, saying that George W. Bush banned stem cell research, which is false. Okay? It wasn't an actual ban. It's technical, but it certainly wasn't a ban. So he shows people these articles, and sometimes they get the factual correction of the false claim in the article, and sometimes they don't. What happens? Nobody's mind changes, and not only does nobody's mind change, but the conservatives become more sure of the falsehood after seeing the correction on weapons of mass destruction and on tax cuts. And these are not debatable matters. Tax cuts do not increase government revenue. Okay? I mean, cut taxes to zero, revenue goes to zero. I mean, but nevertheless, this is what happens. Now, these are political wrong beliefs. That's not the only kind of wrong belief. There are obviously religiously impelled wrong beliefs, too. And what I find fascinating is that in a 2006 Time magazine poll, members of the public actually knew that their minds worked like this, because 64% of them said that if science were to refute one of their religious beliefs, they would keep believing it. So what we're finding about them in psychology studies is something that they're also telling us themselves. So people are not going to give up on a worldview that's deeply held if the facts take it straight on. They're going to keep it, and they even tell us that about themselves. So what are we really dealing with when it comes to religious denial of science in particular? I think Ken Miller Brown has been very instructive about this. He talks about creationism as emotion. In other words, they make scientific claims, lots of them, and they're bogus, whether it's young earth creationism or intelligent design creationism. And we have many, many people who have ably refuted them, including Barbara. But are they really doing it because they're interested in the truth of the matter, or are they doing it because they're essentially a defense mechanism, and they view evolution as a threat to their identity and themselves, and then they'll spin out any kind of rationalization? I think that's the case. I think that if you look at the intelligent design exposed wedge document, you see that they don't really care about science. They think that evolution is a threat to their entire view of how the culture should work. Okay? They think that if you don't have a religiously based culture, you can't have morality, and that evolution is the central threat to that. And so then they'll say anything to attack it, because it's hitting them close to who they are, close to their identities. So why do people act like this? We know. We have an answer. There is a science of why we deny science. There are facts about why we deny facts. And in fact, this science, these facts, is something familiar to all of us if we've ever been in a relationship and gotten in an argument with the person we care about and found them unwilling to change their minds. Does that sound familiar? Or if we've been in a politically split family and we've had arguments with someone who disagrees with us and found that they never, ever, ever change. It's the same phenomenon. Or if we've read literature, I think the best story that I know that captures it, this is from the movie version of Great Expectations. And Great Expectations is a story of self-delusion. It's a story of a guy who wants to believe that Miss Havisham is his benefactor when actually it's the convict. And he comes up with these elaborate rationales, and he ignores all of the evidence that life presents him. And he essentially ruins his life through delusion and rationalization. In all the cases, it's the same process. And what Dickens captured about people in a literary way, we're confirming now based not just on psychology, but based on neuroscience. And the theory that pulls it all together is called motivated reasoning. It's kind of an updated version of cognitive dissonance, for those of you who know what that is. But motivated reasoning, the advantage is that we really have a neuroscientific basis. And when cognitive dissonance was come up with, we didn't have that. Okay, but these are the three core points that you have to understand motivated reasoning. The first, the vast majority of what your brain is doing, you're not conscious of. Okay, you're only conscious of a small percentage of what it's up to. One of the things you're not conscious of is the rapid fire, scientists call them affective with an A, or I just call them emotional, responses that you have to ideas, images, and things long before you're consciously aware that they're actually affecting you. You may be set in motion in a defensive posture if something comes in that's a threat, and you may not actually know that you've been set in motion. So then, the emotional defensive response will guide the process of your conscious reasoning. And in particular, it will guide the process of retrieving memories associated with the topic. So you will call to mind thoughts, associations, arguments, ideas, more emotions, based upon the subconscious impulse that set you in a particular direction. What this means is that by the time you are reasoning, you're actually not acting like a scientist. What are you acting like? A lawyer. You're making your case. And you're impervious often to the other case. And you're very persuasive about it. And you don't know you're doing it. But you're rationalizing. And this explains many, many cases of reasoning going awry, all of the conspiracy theories, all of the nonsense. Explains, you know, things like this, right? The phenomenon, you've heard of this, goalpost shifting, right? Someone makes a claim, and they stake a lot on the claim. And so clearly, if the claim is proved unequivocally false, they should renounce their beliefs, right? This would be the logical thing to do. Is that what happened when they said, show us the birth certificate? No. What about this one? I mean, Harold Camping came up with the idea, after nothing happened on May 21st, did he say, my beliefs are wrong? He said it was actually a spiritual rapture. And that's why you couldn't tell. And then yesterday the world was supposed to end. It didn't end. And I'm sure he's going to come up with something. Motivated reasoning explains this kind of behavior. It explains people missing a lot of different kinds of logical errors, fallacies, hypocrisies. They don't see that they're doing it. The answer used to be, hey, if you just learned more critical thinking, you wouldn't do this anymore. I'm not so sure. I think that actually reasoning is really well designed to help us see the fallacies and arguments of others. Okay? If they're saying something we disagree with, we're great at taking it apart. But if we say something, we don't see our own fallacies. So motivated reasoning doesn't just explain this kind of nonsense. It also explains something that's really insidious in science debates, which is people thinking that the experts are on their side. So on any contested issue, you'll be able to come up with, and sometimes the Christian right generates experts that agree with you. What we know is that people choose who's really an expert and who's not based upon their view of the world. They don't do an accurate count of, oh, almost all the scientists are over here, and then there's these 5 guys. No, they think the 5 guys are scientists, and all the ones over here are bought off, paid for. And Dan Kahan at Yale has done really interesting research on this. He divides up people based upon their moral systems or their cultural values, and divides them up into 4 groups in 2 dimensions. So I don't know if you can see this, but one dimension goes from hierarchical to egalitarian. Right? Egalitarian, we're all equal. We should be equal in terms of our economic opportunities. We should be equal in terms of... Did this fall? Sorry. Sorry about that. We should be equal in economic opportunities. We should be equal in terms of civil rights, right? Everyone should have the same chances in life. Hierarchical means, society should be highly structured. The woman is subservient to the man, all these kinds of things. Then the other axis is individualist to communitarian. All right? An individualist is basically, at the extreme, is a libertarian who thinks that you struggle, you get ahead, or you don't, based upon your own merits, and you don't deserve any help, okay? And what happens to you, good or bad, is fair. And on the communitarian end is government and society need to make sure to protect people from harmful outcomes because it's not just fair. And some people have less chances, and sometimes they live in a community where a big company dumps some poisonous chemicals, and we need to step in at that. That's the communitarian end. Right? The point is that Kahan used these kinds of affiliations, they're survey questions that can tell you where you are in the grid, and then he used them to predict who people thought was a scientific expert. On global warming, for example, if you are, I got to say one more thing. Up here, hierarchical individualist, that's a Republican. Egalitarian communitarian, that's a Democrat, basically. Basically, it's a little more complex than that, but they're in mirror opposite parts of the grid most of the time. So an individualist hierarch, if they're shown a scientist who thinks that global warming is caused by humans, then only 23% think that that person is a, quote, trustworthy and knowledgeable expert. But down here, the egalitarian communitarian, 88% think that that person is a trustworthy or knowledgeable expert. So nobody thinks that science is not on their side. Everybody thinks that science is whatever they want it to be, right? And still, this is not the scariest thing. The scariest thing about motivated reasoning to me is what I'm scientifically termed the smart idiot effect. Okay? And we saw it before. This is the becoming more educated and becoming more unhinged from reality. There's a lot of examples of this. The same thing happens with, did the health care bill contain death panels? Right? The Republicans who claim to know more about health care policy are more likely to believe that there were death panels in the bill. And the Democrats who claim to know more are the opposite. This is the smart idiot effect. And why does it occur? We know that political sophisticates, as they're called, people who engage a lot with the issues, they seem to be worse motivated reasoners. And the reason that they're worse motivated reasoners is because they're just as emotionally biased, but they've got more arguments that they can make. So a lot of people just, they think something, they don't know why they think it, they can't explain themselves very far, but they will just defend their beliefs. The sophisticates, they can talk all day about it, all right? And they convince themselves in the process of their own brilliance. So the more capable you are of coming up with arguments to support your beliefs, the more you may be unwilling to change your beliefs. This would explain, all of this would explain quite a lot about the polarization of America. But it also gets to a key question. I've just gotten back from a trip to a particular university where I'm involved in putting on my first psychology experiment. I'm a scientist. I'm working with actual ones, but I helped. And what we want to determine is whether everyone does motivated reasoning equally. It's not clear that that should be the case. We know that some people are more open-minded than others. The norms of the scientific process are to try to not let this happen to you. We know that people sometimes have more accuracy motivations, like journalists. You know that you're going to have to run a correction if you make a fool of yourself, or you might be sued, or your editor might not let you do the story again. So there's clearly some things that serve as checks on this. So the experiment was designed to determine whether everybody does it equally or not. And the hypothesis is that maybe conservatives, in general, have a more intense need to cling to their beliefs than liberals do. And we're not talking about particular individuals, because individuals could be anywhere. but maybe the groups are different. So is it possible that there's ideological asymmetry in motivated reasoning? This is the cutting edge. Certainly, in some of the research I've already shown you, we've seen something that looks like asymmetry. The Brendan Nyhan study showing that the conservatives became more strong in their beliefs after being refuted. The liberals didn't do that. There are also studies showing that the sophisticates on the right become more wrong with more knowledge. And the guy at Yale, Dan Kahan, showed in another study that I didn't put up there a clear difference between liberals and conservatives with respect to global warming and nuclear power, where what he showed was that as conservatives started to have more knowledge about more scientific literacy, there's 10 questions to measure your scientific literacy, and mathematical numeracy, how good are you solving word problems? The conservatives who did better on those were more unwilling to accept global warming. But the liberals who did better on those were more willing to accept global warming, and the liberals who did better on those were less afraid of nuclear power. What's weird about that is you would think that the communitarian egalitarian biases would lead you to be skeptical of nuclear power. And as you came to know more, if you're just biased, you go more in the direction of your skepticism. But they're going in the liberals are going in the opposite direction on that topic. So that seems also to be an asymmetry. But the problem is there's no reason to think that Democrats, liberals would be immune to motivated reasoning. The chief thing that predicts it is how strongly you feel about a topic. Okay? But there are reasons to think that groups are different. And one reason is personality. So there is a personality trait. It's called openness to experience. And with all the news about Steve Jobs, I do a lot of research on personality now. And if I've ever seen an openness to experience person, it's Steve Jobs. And if I've ever seen a marketing campaign that is designed to appeal to people who are open to experience, it's Apple's Think Different campaign. And these people are not followers. They want to be distinct, they want to be different, they want to be noticed. And what that leads to is more intellectual flexibility, more innovation, more tolerance of change, more tolerance of ambiguity and uncertainty. These people tend to be liberal. They tend to be not very religious also. And what's important, this is one of the big five personality traits, is openness to experience. What's important about openness is it's inversely related to a trait called need for closure. And need for closure is you want a certain answer. You want a definite answer. You want to quash ambiguity. And you want to stop thinking about this, right? So need for closure is associated with something called seizing and freezing. Seizing and freezing is, I need an answer. Give me some evidence. Okay, I've got it. I've seized it. And now I'm freezing. I'm not thinking about anything else. All right, I've got my answer. When you're defensive and closed about a belief and you've seized and frozen upon it, then you're going to be a prime candidate for motivated reasoning and for fighting back against any challenge to your beliefs. We know there's studies that show that anti-evolutionists have strong need for closure. And it seems to be more, just talking about groups in aggregate, more a conservative trait than a liberal one. So that's the hypothesis we're working on now, moving from conservatism, need for closure, motivated reasoning. But this is the cutting edge. This has not all been sussed out in the way that it needs to be, but it's a hypothesis. How much time? I don't know how much time I got left, but I'm tell you, I'm done. Okay, I was going to tell you what we can do to short circuit motivated reasoning and how to defeat it. What's that? Just go ahead or don't go ahead. Very short. Okay, so there's 4 things that have been shown in studies to work. First is framing, because if you pitch inconvenient facts in a different narrative or structure, they might be less threatening. If they're reframed, then people might be more open to them. And Kahan did this at Yale with a study. It's another one of these playing games with people with newspaper articles. It's the same newspaper story about global warming, containing the same facts. And the facts are, scientists come out with yet another report showing global warming is real, caused by humans. This happens all the time, right? But the title that frames the solution differently in an experimental manipulation. On the one hand, it says that the scientific panel recommends a nuclear solution to global warming. And on the other hand, it says they recommend an anti-pollution solution to global warming. When the individualist hierarchs, aka conservatives, read this one, they completely reject global warming science. But when they read this one, they're much more open to the idea that the science might be true, because the facts have been framed into a context that supports their values. This seems to work. Another thing that seems to work is priming people with a manipulation called self-affirmation, which is before you do one of these experiments that threaten your beliefs. You fill out a little, write on a piece of paper about a time when your personality, your character, or your morals led to a good outcome. Sometime in your life when you did something impressive or good that came from who you are. And then you give them threatening information, and you know what? They're not as threatened. You see a statistically significant difference in how much of a defensive response there is. And there's some other things that also seem to work, but I'll just end there because I know that I've gone past my time. So I will just leave with a quotation from a truly profound philosopher named Yoda. And Yoda said, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And I'm afraid when it comes to the denial of science, reality, facts, that's the situation in which we're in. All right.